Hello and welcome to another free code session. My name is Jason Bach. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. I would greatly appreciate it. I'm trying to reach that 1,000 subscriber mark, so subscribe if you haven't done that yet. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that I've been working on with Rocks off camera. And I'm glad I actually did it off camera because the work to finish what was actually 2 issues took quite a long time. The issue that you actually see on the screen is the one I'm going to start working on. But there were 2 that really were sort of edge cases, and I ended up spending way more time than I wanted to, especially for how exceptional they were. And I just kept going with it and going with it. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1.5 step forward, half step back, just slow but steady progress. And I finally got to the end. And in retrospect, the way I ended it is what I should have done in the first place with these special types. But I didn't do that originally. And where I've landed is a somewhat cleaner solution that I really like. But again, it was a lot of effort for arguably very little gain. But one of the things I have in my head now with Rocks is if you can inherit from a type and implement or override members on that type, I should allow you to mock it. And one way or the other. So that's why static abstract members is on the list. But in any event, the thing I worked on was the fact that there are types, argiterator, runtime argument handle, and type reference that you can't pass into generic or type parameters. Same thing with pointers. Ref structs you can now, so long as the anti-constraint is on it. So this, along with this issue, we use projected code, is something I've thought about for a while, which I've tried to do something with pointers that has failed a couple times, but still bugged me because I have to generate this callback with this really ugly name to make sure that they're unique. And what I started realizing is there any way that I can just create this projections class and put all the things that I need to do to support these custom exceptional cases and only do them once. So that's what I worked on along with this at the same time. And what I ended up with real quick is if you look at, for example, one of these generator tests for a pointer. So if I have a pointer, and yes, this does happen, it's not common, but it does happen, where you have something that takes a pointer. What it does now is you'll see that first in the handler, it generates the callback there if it needs to. And so I don't need to have these weird named delegates everywhere. They will always be called callback for handler. Okay. And these have to be custom for each handler because I don't know if you're taking an int or 5 parameters or what you're returning. This is specific for this handler, but this now has a very standard common way of doing it in Rocks. And I like that I ended up on that spot. The other thing is you see I do have a generic pointer argument of int. And so if you look down here, now I'm creating types like this. This is something I tried before, except what I realized is, well, you still need the splat, the actual pointer syntax there. And to generalize that, I was like, well, what do I make 2, 3, 4 of them? Am I going to end up in the same spot if somebody does 5, which, my God, I don't know why you do that. But what I do now is I only generate one of these based on how many splats you have there, basically. And if you have 2, it's going to say pointer argument. I just keep adding that word on there. So yeah, so this works now, and it's much cleaner. I do the same thing, for example, with these special types, where if you do use like an argiterator for whatever reason, again, it generates this handler for you, and then it will generate down at the bottom. Here you'll see that I create this iterator argument with this evaluation. Actually, that I look at this now, I could put the evaluation delegate in here, but doesn't that. The only reason I put it in the handler like this is because that's specific to this handler. If I put it outside, then it's going to be specific to this, and I'm back to the same boat where what happens if you have two members that need the same callback delegate structure. And then I have to figure out, well, do I generate one for all of them? And that gets into overloading and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, I don't want to go there. Make these specific for each handler. But these, I'm kind of like, no, leave them out because it makes sense that way. So at the end of the day, this got rid of a lot of code that I was doing. And also I had to add some code to now make all these new types. There's like 4 or 5 of them for each of these special cases. But the nice thing is that I don't have these weird named callbacks anymore. The actual names that you see now in IntelliSense are a little bit cleaner. They're still a little odd to look at, but that's just the way it is. But they do read a little nicer, and now I can actually support these 3 types, which again is so rare. But the only reason I noticed this is because it came up recently and with my code generation test app, because something in reflection exposed one of these types in such a way that I could mock it, but then I realized I couldn't because I was passing this into a type parameter, and that was disallowed. So that's how I got down this whole road. The thing about it is they're very rare. They're also, what I found out is that they're ref structs. So the code that I was doing to find if it's a ref struct will then use a ref struct argument. That's hard coded into rocks because that handles every ref struct. It was suddenly generating code to say use ref struct for these. And of course you can't because it would pass that in as a type parameter and that would fail. So I had to put in special logic to say, well, if it's a ref struct, but first, if it's one of these special types, do this instead. So in any event, those 2 now are closed, and I'm really happy that they're closed because they're off the plate and I can move on to other things. And speaking of other things, what I'm going to work on is this. And this came up because on the project I'm on at work, we're actually using rocks for mocking scenarios. And it's been good to, as the phrase I've used for many years, eat your own dog food. I don't remember where I first heard that. I think it was maybe when I read Steve McConnell's book, the Code Complete book. I think it might have been in there, but I've heard that phrase for decades, eating your own dog food. And that was basically the phrase of use what you've built or something like that. And in using rocks, I found a couple of things. One was a bug, nothing major, which is actually good. I was happy about that. But when I was writing a test or a test failed or something, and I was getting the message here, I'm like, okay, that's great, but I don't know what value it is. And in this test, there was a couple of different expectations set with different values of the log level being passed in. So what I was thinking about is maybe I do something like this and actually give you the values that were passed in to the member if there were any parameters. Okay. And that might also be something, as I put in here, also consider what needs to show up with type arguments, if any. Okay, so if the member was generic, would that automatically show up? I think it does, but I don't know if it actually passes in the name of the type that you gave it. I just don't remember off the top of my head. But if that's the case, then I don't need to do that. But this is really what I want, and what I'm going to do is probably create something like a parameter formatter that just formats. And I was thinking this morning, because I'm on vacation now, I started a 10-day vacation today. Woohoo! And I was thinking about this before I started recording is I think there's code actually in Rocks that allows me to format like optional values to methods. And maybe I can reuse that to get something that's nicely formatted, like for strings and enums and things like that. So we'll see. But the eventual goal is to, instead of generating this, it's going to generate this. So I actually need to, within a within a raw string literal in rocks, I need to generate code that's going to create a raw string literal. So that will be kind of a mind bend, but it's fun. And I also realized in something I'm not going to do right now, but I put it on the plate. Again, if you ever come up with an idea or something that you're thinking of and going, this is kind of interesting, you don't need to solve it right there. At the very least, though, put it on the backlog. Make a story for it, make an issue for it, and that's what I did here, which is to start considering to move all of the code that is used by clients or developers that are using rocks. Instead of having this where I've got the rocks assembly twice in the package, in the NuGet package, so it allows you then to still reference stuff within rocks. Long story short, it's something that I don't particularly care for. So what I'm thinking of is maybe what I do is take all the types that are needed by generated code and actually generate them like I am doing with ref struct argument right now. That would be a fair amount of work. And the reason, that's not the reason why I wouldn't do it, but the reason that I've been avoiding it is because then you are just having C# code as a string. And yes, I've got tests, so I always have the ability to test that stuff out, but I don't get compiler time notifications that the code that I'm going to generate is actually bad. I have to actually wait until I run the tests, which is fine. And that would have the eventual goal of I can make my NuGet package a little bit lighter, I think. But that's something I'm going to work on, and I don't even know if I'll do it for 9.0. But again, put the idea down, at least it's there, and maybe you come back to it later. But what we're going to come back to now is this one. So I already got a branch made. And now what I need to find is where in the world do I do that stuff with optional parameters? Is it in object extensions? Here. There we go. That's kind of what I want. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. So you see here that I can say things like, the different min-max values and stuff. This is perfect. This is perfect what I want. If it's a string, it actually puts that around there. Now, if it's an enum, though, that is the one thing I don't think this handles quite yet. And, no, I'm sorry. I am wrong. This does do what I want. Now, the one thing, though, that this doesn't do is that this can be done at runtime. So all of this down here is runtime stuff. So you get I could pass in a byte self, S byte, and all that other stuff and do that at runtime, because I could have a switch on the object value here and say, okay, if you're one of these, do exactly what you're doing. The one thing, though, is with the self type is that you see with nulls and type kind here with enum, which is what I want to do. I want to have that fully qualified name for the enum and not just the value. But in this case, it works with type symbols, and also with null. You see here that it only works for when I have a type symbol. The compilation is only used for the enum. So it's like I got a lot here that I want to reuse, and I don't want to not do it this way, if that makes sense. But I'm going to have to figure out how to do this so that I can get a formatted value. And of course, now this is going to have to become public, which is fine. That's fine if I do it that way. Again, always have the mentality when I'm designing code to minimize the blast radius, minimize the exposure of things that I'm creating. I typically create types sealed. Things are non-virtual. Stuff is also private or internal until I know it's going to be needed by something else. Because the less that you can expose to things, the less they can be used incorrectly. Only expose the stuff and allow things to be extended that have to be done that way. Too often I see people that make something public or make something, where it's not sealed, and people start extending it and going, wait, why doesn't this work the way I expect it to? It doesn't happen often, but by minimizing that, it just can't happen unless somebody does some very strange stuff. with reflection or things like that. And then to me, it's like you're accepting the responsibility of doing things you really shouldn't be doing anyway. Like if you're trying to set the value of a private field, not saying that that never happens or there's not a need to call a private method or something like that, but you should also accept responsibility if a type ever changes that, because they're under no obligation to support you in that case. So in any event, this is close. This is close. So let's actually do something like public. And what I also comment in XML provides extensions for C object values. Good enough for me. Okay. And then what I want to do is, while I'm on vacation, my computer's noise that I keep complaining about, I'm going to see if I can take a look at it or bring it in, because it's just, I got the feeling it's a fan and it's it might be a ball bearing in it or something like that. I really don't know, but I need to get it looked at in any event. Okay, so this gets a stringify version of a value that we put into the call site of an emitted method. What I want to do though is say get format value, because it is a little different and we don't have these at this point, nor will we ever. Let's not necessarily think about code reuse at this point. So if self is enum, then we can just, right now I'm just going to say return self.toString. Because I definitely do want to get the name of the type. I just, off the top of my head, I know enums are a little weird. Now, here if it's null, if what we actually got was, so if self.getType is value type, now we can say, yes, it's this. Oh, really? Am I always assuming? Oh, so down here, I actually don't care about that. I get it. And, oh, so if it was null, it would have gone here. So this is basically saying if it's not null, that's why it's safe, and the compiler, I'm guessing, can recognize that. What I want to do now is if self is null, well, then unfortunately we can't, like if I say, nope, type, get type. That's the string type name. It's always the type name. Yeah, so there is unfortunately in this case no way for us to know what it is. So I'm just going to say null. Otherwise, we'll just do this. I may want to put in a to-do handle array collections a little nicer. In other words, if you give me a array of ints that are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I want to show that as something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I also want to be careful, because if you pass in an array of 100 values, I don't want to show all 100. So I want to do something that's kind of like, well, I'll show you the first and the last one. So I'll do this, ... and do ellipses, and then 5. So it'll kind of show you that you gave me an array, and you only did this. I think this, now that I'm doing this, this is actually reminding me that I think in the debugger, there's a way that it only shows you, well, it doesn't even show you this. What would be nice is if this was, so if it's less than 2, you would just show 1, 5. If it's more than that, then you would put in here like 1, ... And like that shows you how many are in there or something like that. But I don't want it to be hinting that this is the actual value. So, again, I might be overthinking this, but that's what coding's all about, is overthinking things. So yeah, I'm just thinking in my head with, and the other thing too is if you have like a collection that the first value or the last value is also a collection, so you have like an array of arrays, is that you don't keep going down. Like if you did that, then what you would have is this would have a depth. Format value would essentially have a depth, and there would be, this is the public one that we use, but we only go down 3. So maybe the last element in the array also does that, and then that last has that, and it does that like 4 or 5 times. And it would stop here and basically kind of say ... here. Like that's as far as I'm going to go. It is an array, but I'm not going to show you any more than this. I don't know if I really like this syntax either. I'm going to mull over this. I'm actually going to go for a bike ride this morning, and so I'll come back and maybe think about this more. But that's something that I would kind of want to do, and use a depth max value to stop recursion. Okay. And again, this is only going to happen in the case where you have an exception. It just makes it a little bit nicer to look at the exception message and go, oh, that's what failed. So we have a couple to-dos here. We want to need to figure out how to get this to be global, my namespace dot my enum dot second value, or something like that. And hopefully you're not doing something where you're passing in an invalid value, and it's also defensive against unknown enum values of a given type. Because I know enum.get, there's a get name, and that retrieves the name of the constant, but underline type here, underline type of the specified enumeration. And enums are always value types. So we could do get underline type here, self.get type. Then we can do full name. Do you get an alias at this point? No, you don't. Assembly qualified name. I can't remember if that's the one we want or if it's the full name, one or the other. I can do some stuff in Sharp Lab and figure out what we want. So we do something like this, and then we would do also something like enum.get name, passing in self.get type, and the self as well. And then that would also get us the name. So this might not be as bad as I'm thinking it would be, but I need to do some work there. So I'm going to end the episode here. And in the next episode, I'm going to dive in a little bit more to this stuff and figure out how to handle enums and nulls, and maybe do something where I can kind of sort of maybe squint at this hard enough to get some reuse out of this. But at the end of the day, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. If I do a one-off here for the runtime case, that should work. Thank you all for watching. Leave comments and questions below. Remember to subscribe. See you in the next episode.